Face to face, did Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin just open up a whole new chapter in U.S.-Russia relations? Defiant protesters greet world leaders in Hamburg for a second day. Why is everyone at the G20 talking about a Clinton campaign staffer? This is State of America Tonight.
President Putin and I have been discussing various things.
The leaders have met. Putin and Trump have had the handshake that everyone was waiting for.
Vladimir Putin is incredibly well prepared for these meetings.
You do have to talk about Russia's involvement in our democracy.
The president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, is their spy-in-chief.
Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows for sure.
A lot does get determined by how the measure each man takes of the other.
Hello, I'm Paula Newton, live in New York, and for Kate Baldwin. To our viewers watching around the world, welcome. This is State of America Tonight. Now, only 6 people were in the room talking, but now millions are talking about it. That room, of course, was where the presidents of the United States and Russia sat face to face, along with their 2 top diplomats with 2 interpreters. Now, the 2-hour and 15-minute meeting overshadowed all others at the G20 summit in Hamburg, Germany. Afterwards, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said in an off-camera, audio-only briefing, the first issue to come up was, drumroll please, Russian hacking.
The president opened the meeting with President Putin by raising the concerns of the American people regarding Russian interference in the 2016 election. They had a very robust and lengthy exchange on the subject. The president pressed President Putin on more than one occasion regarding Russian involvement. President Putin denied such involvement.
There's a little bit of confusion over that. We're going to get to it later. Now, Tillerson added Russian interference was likely a subject the 2 leaders, of course, would never agree on. So they tried to find a way to move forward. But wait, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who was at the meeting, says Donald Trump accepted Vladimir Putin's assurances that Russia did not meddle in the election. Now, a senior White House official, yeah, you guessed it, denies it. So which is it? Does he think they meddled or not? Now, further muddying the waters, CNN has learned Russia ramped up its spying efforts after the 2016 election. Current and former U.S. intelligence officials tell CNN they have noticed an increase since the election. According to the U.S. intelligence community, the Russians have not been slowing their retaliatory efforts after it meddled in the U.S. election. Now, after the Putin-Trump meeting, a reaction from Tillerson, and he also spoke about something significant to both governments, and that's a ceasefire agreement in the southwest of Syria brokered by the U.S., Russia, and Jordan. Now, he explained why this ceasefire should be different than all the rest.
This de-escalation area was agreed. It's well-defined. Agreements on who will secure this area. A ceasefire has been entered into, and I think this is our first indication of the U.S. and Russia being able to work together in Syria, and as a result of that, we had a very lengthy discussion regarding other areas in Syria that we can continue to work together on to de-escalate the areas and the violence once we defeat ISIS.
Now, in the handshake before the meeting, yes, you knew the handshake would go viral, Presidents Putin and Trump seemed to be sizing each other up and gave no indication of what was to come.
We're going to have a talk now, and obviously that will continue. But we look forward to a lot of very positive things happening for Russia, for the United States, and for everybody concerned. And it's an honor to be with you.
An honor to be with you. Now, as long with any G20 summit, the high-level meetings are set against the backdrop of course, protests. German police in riot gear are facing off with protesters in the streets of Hamburg. At least 70 people have been arrested and dozens more injured. The protests have forced a planned outing for the G20 leaders' spouses to be canceled. Now, another issue on the table at the summit, of course, North Korea. German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is hosting the summit, called on the UN to respond to Pyongyang's latest missile launch.
I would like to say that everyone who talked about it expressed their great concern that this development is very threatening, and they all pointed to the role of the UN Security Council. We hope together that the UN Security Council will find an appropriate answer.
Now, the North defends the launch as what they call self-defense from hostile U.S. policy. In an earlier statement, the North Korean government said the U.S. helps its own interests by sacrificing others. Now, while the Trump-Putin meeting took most of the attention, Mr. Trump also met with Mexico's president. During their photo op, a reporter requested one of President Trump's greatest hits. Roll it.
Mr. Trump, you still want Mexico to pay for the wall?
Thank you all.
Absolutely. Now, back in Washington, things are relatively quiet, or as quiet as things can ever get in the Capitol. The president's gone and Congress is on vacation, but there's news. The U.S. government's ethics watchdog is quitting. Walter Shaub headed up the Office of Government Ethics and sparred with the administration when the president refused to sell his business interests and when Kellyanne Conway plugged Ivanka Trump's products. Now, in a statement, Walter Shaub says the current ethics program needs improvements. Yeah, you can make whatever you will of that statement. Now, we want to go straight to what we're learning from that high-stakes meeting between the American and Russian president. CNN senior White House correspondent Jeff Zeleny is there in Hamburg, Germany. I know you've been watching all of it and you listened in to that Rex Tillerson briefing. Jeff, what can you tell us?
Well, Paul, I can tell you now, and excuse the helicopters sounding overhead here in Hamburg, but Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that President Trump, from the very beginning of the meeting, confronted Vladimir Putin on the election interference. He raised it at the very beginning. But as we're learning more now, the Russian side of the story is that, yes, they raised it, but the Russian side, Vladimir Putin and Sergei Lavrov, asked for proof and evidence of election tampering. And the president did not offer any. They talked about it and agreed to move forward and agreed to work on fighting cyber attacks in the future and working on election protection going forward. But it really raises the question if anything will be done by this. So tonight we still have a big unanswered question, sort of by moving on and diminishing the seriousness of this. Is there any incentive at all for the Russian government to do anything about this? But they did talk about Syria, a potential ceasefire there, and other matters in a 2-hour and 15-minute long meeting. Quite extraordinary and much longer than anticipated.
Yeah, definitely. And that's making the headlines. Jeff, we'll let you go to continue to get more information from White House officials about exactly what happened during that meeting. As Jeff points out, much longer than expected. It was supposed to last for only 30 minutes. Went on for more than 2 hours. Our panel weighs in on this highly anticipated meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin.
Heyo, Trey Kirby here from the Starters, and I'll be joined by Skeets, Tass, and Lee in Las Vegas for NBA Las Vegas Summer League live on NBA TV, July 7th through 11. After that night's final game, we'll talk to some of the top rookies in the 2017 draft class, and more than likely, we're going to give them a cake. What are they going to do with that cake? Only way to find out is by watching.
Now, we are following growing protests outside of the summit. You are looking at live pictures as police continue to try and contain those protesters. Demonstrators are trying to disrupt the summit by blocking access, and that's the problem. We're told dozens of people have already been arrested, and at least 160 police officers have been injured in the protests since Thursday. Of course, we will continue to watch that developing story. And, a reminder, the spouses could not go out for their event, and I'm sure this is causing quite a few headaches for police as they try and keep everyone safe. Now, to our headline story, it was billed as a high-stakes showdown between two world leaders, but instead of tough words, U.S. President Trump and Russian President Putin offered each other, apparently, words of praise or at least conciliation, and after the two emerged from a more than 2-hour-long meeting, the U.S. Secretary of State described them as having a positive chemistry. We'll debate what that means. The panel tonight, Basil Smykal is the executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, Josh Rogin, CNN political analyst and columnist at The Washington Post, Republican strategist Susan Del Percio, and political consultant Harlan Hill is an advisory board member for Donald Trump's re-election campaign. We're already there, Harlan? Seriously?
Yeah, it started on Inauguration Day.
Well, let's go then. Okay. Basil, though, first to you. Listen, as a member of the Democratic Party, look, the president went in there. He said, "What? You got to be happy with this."
I don't know if happy is the right word.
Come on, content. Give me something.
I don't know. Look, Did they have a good meeting? Maybe. But the truth of the matter is this was more about Vladimir Putin sizing up Donald Trump than Donald Trump being this sort of forceful president that's going to go in and lay down the law in front of this man. I don't suspect that's happened. If I am proven wrong, then I am proven wrong. I like the fact that he brought up the fact that that Russians interfered with our election. Is it going to be followed by sanctions, more sanctions? I don't know the answer to that. So it's really a wait and see for me, but it was their first meeting. It lasted 2.5 hours, so they talked about something. So we'll see what else comes out of it.
Josh?
Yeah, a good meeting is better than a bad meeting, but it doesn't actually solve the problems, okay? What we have is a pattern of Russian misbehavior, not only in America, but around the world. So if that's going to change, then that's a good thing, but the meeting doesn't promise that. The biggest takeaway was that they came to an agreement over ceasefires in Syria, and that agreement is based on Russian security assurances in areas in Syria where there's fighting going on. That's a really difficult thing to pull off. Are the Syrians on board with that? Is the Assad regime on board with that? I don't think the opposition's on board with that. Are the Iranians on board with that? So this is a great example of setting high aspirations for what can be accomplished in the U.S.-Russia relationship. That's fine. We should want these two countries to get along. We should want to step back from the brink of tension. But I'll believe it when I see it.
And on that, I mean, there have been a lot of attempts for ceasefires in Syria. They've not, they've not come through, unfortunately. Harlan, though, do you think this will convince the president that, look, if I actually bring up Russian interference, which a lot of intelligence agencies, let's not count them, have said there was Russian interference, that he can just put the whole issue at least to one side?
I think that he has, and he's attempted to do so repeatedly. I think we should put into context the president's interaction with Russia so far. We're only a few months into his presidency. He's called out the Russian president for potentially meddling in the election. He has told the Ukraine that we're no longer going to accept Russian aggression. He's told Poland that we're going to support them in their pursuit of energy independence from Russia. He said that we're going to impose new sanctions on Russia. I mean, what more do we want from this guy? He's calling out the Russians at every turn. And in terms of force, he's actually putting, some action behind his words.
But to Basil's point, has he been outplayed? Because, Sergei Lavrov came out of the meeting immediately and said,
Putin
we
wants
didn't
these
accept
sanctions?
that.
I mean, he hasn't been outplayed. He's playing aggressive chess with Putin at this point. And I think that Putin came to the table today realizing that he had to concede a little bit with the president. He had to give the president a win, which is what we're seeing in the case of Syria.
But let's not forget, what happened yesterday with the president's speech in Poland was a great lead up to this meeting. And it was a good meeting. It can't be a great meeting. No meeting like this among any leaders can be actually a great meeting. It can only be really bad, not so bad, or decent. And that's exactly what we had. We had a good, decent meeting. And that they went in and, yes, they addressed a little bit of Russian interference. My problem with the President Trump is he probably shouldn't have questioned our intelligence agencies yesterday while overseas. That was a bit of a concern. But he has addressed the issues with Russia. The only thing he has to do right now is say, I'm not going to comment on any ongoing investigation. I'm going to wait until Director Mueller's report is concluded. And that would really take him a long way so he could stop talking about it. I don't think he's going to do that. And then there's things like, when he tweeted out this morning, it's unfortunate, and I probably shouldn't even bring it up because it's somewhat insignificant, but he says all the talk is about Podesta's emails. I mean, or his talk is about Podesta not handing over the email server.
Okay,
no, it's not.
Okay,
it's
but
not.
let's just
Podesta
pause.
has nothing to do with the
Okay,
DNC.
but let's pause for a moment because I think I can circle back to Russia after this. But let's talk about that. He tweets the Podesta saying everybody here, that means the G20, is talking about these Podesta's, the Podesta's involvement with the DNC and why he didn't hand over the servers. I just want to go through Podesta's reply, which was not that polite. Apparently, he's on a vacation with his wife and pulled over on the side of the road and is basically saying,
because I would do that too, right?
Yeah, get a grip. You're representing the United States. I had nothing to do with the DNC. I am going to leave for a minute, though, Basil, because, the DNC does have a lot to answer for as to why that happened. But again, to my point, put it to bed, put it away. This will help you if you just confront Russia on this issue and move on, because they're always going to disagree about this.
Well, I'm going to bring in sort of Harlan and Susan's points for a second, because the president actually does, and I'm going to be very fair about this, the president actually has an opportunity to show himself in a different light on this world stage right now. put some of the domestic issues behind, say, can't comment on a current investigation, puts this out. The fact that he actually had a full bilateral meeting with Vladimir Putin and not a pull aside is an actual accomplishment. But the question is he going to just come out of this these few days is the United States actually going to gain ground on Germany, on China, in terms of being sort of that world power again? Or is he going to continue to be diminished and isolated?
Well,
If he will not do
is the
that,
past going to repeat itself? Every time he has a good moment in time, and whether it's giving a speech or this trip, which so far has gone extremely well. He has a meeting with President of China tomorrow, and that we'll be looking at that as well. But this has been a good meeting. He will get, quote, like he likes to say, good reviews. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, will he do anything that will step on what happened in this trip?
I actually don't think a meeting is an accomplishment in and of itself. A meeting is just a meeting, okay?
But they got stuff done.
But look at the context. What happened in Germany this weekend? You had the EU and Japan sign a major trade deal that cuts the United States out of competitiveness in both of those countries. You had the leader of Germany publicly rebuking the president of the United States' position on trade and climate change, right? You had the president of the United States give a speech in Poland that seemed to endorse Poland's backslide away from democratic principles, okay? So, yes, this meeting was good, great, okay, but a lot of things that happened this weekend show a stark departure of what America's traditional role would be.
Harlan, you got to get in here before we go to break.
What more could you possibly want from him?
I'm just told you.
He's reaffirmed our support for NATO. He stood behind our ally in Poland.
Yeah.
He stood behind our allies in the Ukraine. I mean, what more could you possibly want from him at this point?
He gave a speech where he said that Western civilization is under attack.
And it is.
That should be the priority.
And it is.
That is a vast departure from decades of bipartisan foreign policy consensus that American foreign policy should be based on building relationships.
Yeah, but
this is what he ran on. This is what he ran on.
Everything else, I don't think is as significant. I think Harlan, not to play mediator here, but Harlan has a really good point. I mean, that I respect, because that one line, yes, I agree, that's problematic. But compared to the things that he did say, other things he said,
like what?
I think are much more
significant. So I have to be the heavy here and blow a whistle. You can be the mediator. Unfortunately, I'm bad cop. Coming up, Presidents Trump and Putin discuss the North Korean crisis. We'll hear what the U.S. Secretary of State has to say about that. And of course, the panel's going to be back. Aren't you thrilled?
Mondays on TNT. Enter the provocative world of a young William Shakespeare in TNT's new drama series, Will.
We are at war, and our only weapons are words.
Told with a revolutionary visual style and modern soundtrack, the series celebrates all the love, lust, history, and brilliance of William Shakespeare. TNT's new series, Will, airs Mondays at 9, starting July 10th on TNT and on the TNT app.
We did have a pretty good exchange on North Korea. I would say the Russians see it a little differently than we do. So we're going to continue those discussions and ask them to do more. Russia does have economic activity with North Korea, but I would also hasten to add Russia's official policy is the same as ours, a denuclearized Korean peninsula.
That was U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson in his off-camera briefing, after the Trump-Putin meeting, indicating there's still no consensus on what to do about North Korea's nuclear weapons program. We want to get back to our panel. I mean, Basil, it's shocking, isn't it? There's still no consensus on this. And Russia can actually be much more helpful than it is being.
Oh, absolutely. They could be extraordinarily helpful. And again, going back to the 2.5-hour meeting, give me details about how, if Russia is apart from the United States on this issue, how are you going to push Russia to do the right thing by you? And I'm not so sure that the president, although I think what we've seen from North Korea in the last few days and weeks is incredibly distressing, and I think we're in very dangerous territory, quite frankly. Yeah. But I don't know if the president actually knows enough about the detail of the policy to push the Russian president to move to that direction.
This is the perfect example of how something can be discussed constructively at a meeting, but there's still no actual progress. What Russia has been doing is increasing its economic activity with North Korea in a direct attempt to undermine U.S. policy, okay? Tillerson sort of papered over that, right? But the idea here is, okay, having the discussions are good. This is not a knock against Trump. he and Tillerson did the right thing by bringing it up. But U.S. and Russian interests, U.S. and Russian policies, U.S. and Russian objectives are different, okay? And we can't pretend that, like, a conversation is going to solve any of that.
So, Harlan, to Basil and Josh's point, do you think, tell me what you know about the president's capacity to sit there with a government that's incredibly transactional, which has basically wedged its way into Syria in the last few years, very effectively, I might add, to actually have them come to the table and be constructive on North Korea?
I think that we need to put, once again, North Korea into perspective. And this isn't a problem that even President Barack Obama's administration created, or even President George W. Bush's administration created with the nuclear North Korea. It goes all the way back to Bill Clinton and their pursuit of ICBM there. So this is a problem that's decades in the making. The president's capacity to unilaterally solve this problem, it's unprecedented.
But I'll remind you that he has shown hubris towards this in tweets and everything else, saying, "I'll handle it, don't worry."
I think that we've seen a real reset with the Russians, and I'm hopeful that coming out of this 2-hour and 15-minute meeting today, that we can see some constructive progress with the Russians, that they'll stand behind us and work with us. But as President Trump will even admit, and he's done so on Twitter, he thought that the same thing would happen with the Chinese, and it hasn't materialized.
Right. But again, the work with the Chinese has only been for 6 months. To think that we would have come up with an answer after 6 months is absurd, that China could fix it. But you did say something very interesting in your question to Harlan, which was knowing that we know President Putin is very transactional. Well, so is President Trump. And the one thing we also know about Donald Trump, based on the campaign, is that he's also willing to shift his policies
He's not dogmatic.
or his where he thinks he's supposed to be. So that is also another reason that there is at least a glimmer of hope that these two leaders can work together, because being transactional will work to both of them. And it goes to your point, Josh, about how what's in Russia's interest may not be in the U.S. interest, but if they can make a certain deal.
But that's the thing. That's the challenge, I think, from the politics of all of this. And where are you taking the American people in the narrative about what the U.S. is doing with Russia, with North Korea? And I think that's sort of what we're all touching on. That the tweets undermine everything he tries to do on a daily basis, the campaign rhetoric, all of that. To be honest, all of that is coming to bear right here, right now at this G20, because he's dealing with some of the most critical issues that the world is dealing with right now. And I think the American people, indeed, I think the European community is saying, which Donald Trump are we going to believe here in the midst of all?
Quickly, Josh, and then I just want to get to another little point.
The U.S.-Russia relationship is complex. There are going to be some things we're not going to agree with them on. North Korea is one of those things, okay? We have to push them on the things that we need to push them on and cooperate where we need to cooperate. If we can make a deal in Syria, fine. I don't think it's going to work out. North Korea, they're definitely working at cross purposes, okay? Ukraine, there's negotiations to be done. In the end, the meeting just sets the stage for all of these things. The follow-up will be determined.
And getting back to that meeting that we have to say, even with translation went on 2 hours and 15 minutes, it had to be substantive. I love this detail that Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, said that at one point Melania Trump came in and said, "Listen, guys, we got to go. We have a dinner to go to." But I think it does show a secret weapon that perhaps Donald Trump does have, especially when he's abroad.
Yeah, so far on these two overseas trips, Melania Trump has handled herself just perfectly. She's been a great representative of the United States. She really believes in following the protocol. I think she takes pride in her role there. And it's a very quiet story. Unfortunately, most people care about what she's wearing, but she really has done some really good things.
Is great.
I mean, she looks, don't get me wrong, she looks fantastic.
I mean,
Absolutely.
look at these pictures.
Yeah.
That dress is amazing.
But she is really doing her husband well in the role she's serving.
Yeah, and
this is the common thread with all of the Trump women. You know, Laura Trump is unbelievably poised and professional. Ivanka, Melania, the Trump men are surrounded by really strong women, and I think that's usually a pretty good sign.
Can I just say that was also true in the previous administration, but they never got credit for it. But that's not true.
That's not true. Michelle's approval ratings were extremely high. We had to consider Republicans.
Among us, absolutely.
We're going to have to hold it there. Wonder Women Unite. Basil, Josh, Susan, and Harlan, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. This is the day 169, I should say, of President Trump's administration, and that's State of America Tonight. Please check out our podcast, subscribe at Apple Podcasts or your favorite app, and have a great weekend. We will see you right back here next week.